Mies and Shiva's feminist epistemology, Ecofeminism, is articulated through three interrelated points: the interplay between capitalism and patriarchy, the theoretical connections between gender and ecological concerns, and the adverse social and environmental impacts of modernization and development programs. Their work is a collection of 20 essays, offering a feminist critique of ecological and social problems affecting both developed and non-industrialized countries, with a particular focus on Europe and Southeast Asia, drawing on their dual roles as activists and academicians. Mies and Shiva construct a comprehensive theoretical framework that highlights the systems of domination and exploitation of both nature and women through the converging forces of capitalism and patriarchy. This analogy is rooted in the historical premise that man is to woman as culture is to nature, suggesting that men are inherently associated with the construction of culture in society. The authors argue that modern culture, symbolized by science and politics, lacks ethical considerations and devalues emotions and imagination. Consequently, technology, such as nuclear energy, genetic engineering, and computers, is seen as inherently destructive, particularly towards women and nature. In their analysis, nature becomes symbolically linked with woman, as both are engaged in a mutual struggle for liberation from capitalist patriarchy. Mies and Shiva extend the feminist concept of shared oppression among women to include the victimization of indigenous peoples, colonial societies, and ecosystems. This approach represents an application of second-generation feminist theorizing to third-generation realities. They introduce the concept of symbiosis to describe the living relationship between individuals and all other living creatures, suggesting that disruptions of such symbioses are central to patriarchal domination. The process of civilization, which emancipated man from the realm of nature, paradoxically created a fluctuating attitude of desire and repulsion towards the natural world, and, by extension, towards women. Mies draws on the existential theorist Simone de Beauvoir to inform much of her feminist critique. Both nature and women are defined as the other in the socio-historical development of man. According to Mies, man seeks to incorporate the other and achieve self-awareness by eliminating the autonomous nature of women. Eventually, man attains the development of culture and self-determination through the transcendence of immanence, a term referring to the self's immersion in the mundane experiences of the everyday world as represented by nature. As gender roles became institutionalized, a patriarchal worldview emerged, centering on man as the measure of all value. This worldview and the subsequent cultural structures emphasized hierarchical order, where diversity was considered valuable only if it facilitated commercial exploitation. Cultural mechanisms embodied in the concept of modernity aim to replace the psychosocial damage caused by man's self-alienation from nature. Capitalist patriarchy employs the principle of selection and elimination to reduce people and objects into exploitable components, using technology to fragment unified perceptions and foster a false sense of otherness. Mies and Shiva strengthen the analogy between the experiences of individuals and ecological well-being by developing the term colonialism. Mies and Shiva define colonialism at two levels: the actions of modern societies in controlling or destroying the natural resources of other cultures, and the broader application of colonization to describe how women and their bodies are exploited by the patriarchy inherent in society and culture. The concept of the state is described as a masculine identity that coops the concept of land as a sacred and ecological household, embodied in the feminine term nation. This co-option occurs through capitalist development, wherein the protective effects of indigenous nation states are eroded by external forces, such as transnational corporations, and the creation of markets, while industrialized nations systematically destroy biodiversity. These same global interests urge conservation among impoverished, non-industrialized states by deconstructing the myth of catching-up development, which includes the homogenization of indigenous cultures based on Euro-American ideals. The authors provide a critical perspective on the limitations of purported egalitarian efforts. Despite its strengths, the book has some limitations. While the theoretical framework effectively describes the developmental factors related to capitalist patriarchy, it does not posit a causative factor for gender differences. The premise that nature and women are the other is presented as a fundamental issue within social interactions, but the authors seem almost critical of causation theories, particularly biological hypotheses, labeled as essentialism. Mies and Shiva attempt to navigate between historical materialist and essentialist interpretations of gender in society, critiquing the latter. Their definition of essentialism confines social relationships to biological terms, but they are also guilty of political and spiritual essentialism, attributing all social roles to either a political or spiritual origins, rather than biological hypotheses. Throughout the book, nature is often referred to as if it were a sentient entity, rather than an abstract concept. Instead of challenging patriarchally derived gender roles, the book appears to accept and build upon them, particularly the traditional roles of indigenous peoples.